Hello, I'm Jo Chamberlain, the Executive Director of the Coastside Land Trust, and welcome you to one in our series of educational webinars. This one is Coastside Bugs with Dr. Stephanie Dole, and we'll get right to her presentation in a moment. A few logistics about how the webinar will work and how you can help make these successful in the future, continue to be successful now and in the future. All of our webinars are online and available to everyone. So they're often picked up by search engines. Please enjoy it. Those of you who are registered for today will receive a link in your email box that you can link in and look at this webinar. Or again, you can visit it through our website, coastsidelandtrust.org. After Stephanie's presentation, Kate Dickey will come on and she will lead us through a process of questions and answers from Stephanie specific to your interest in these wonderful, wonderful creatures we share our planet with. They are so much fun. They have such personality and vibrancy, and they are really the backbone of what makes life possible on our planet. Please consider donating to the Coastside Land Trust so that we can continue to provide these fabulous webinars with these incredible professionals that open our lives to many, many new things. So at this point, some fun things about Kate is that she's a UC Davis graduate in entomology, and then she promptly went on and got her PhD from Michigan State University. And since then, she has dedicated her life to educating all of us about the value, the vibrance, and the incredible joy that these animals can bring to us in our everyday life and in how our planet functions and the importance that they have in every moment that we are here on the planet. So Stephanie, it's wonderful to have you with us today. Please share any additional things about yourself that you'd like to, and we're so pleased to have you with us. Welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, Jo, for that lovely introduction. It was like going to bug church. It was amazing. And I definitely feel all those things about sharing this wonderful, incredible world of terrestrial arthropods that brings so much joy and wonder to my life. So I'm going to go ahead and launch into the presentation. We're going to be doing a mix of slides, and also I'm coming to you here from my office in San Mateo, and this is where a lot of the bugs live. If you've seen me give presentations, this is where they all live, and this is where the components of the pop-up museum are stored. So if you've seen those, I have a lot of those that I can show you as well. So let me start my screen share and we'll get launched on this. All right. Okay, so it's an honor to be here today, and I'm excited to talk to you about the beautiful arthropod diversity that we have here in California. This particular beetle has a little story behind it. This is a very tiny, couple millimeter long beetle that a child gave to me at a park in Menlo Park while I was doing an exhibit there at an outdoor event. And I took it home in a little jar, and this is on the desk that I am presenting to you right now. I put it on a leaf from my garden and did a photo shoot with it before letting it go, and it did this wonderful thing of popping open its wings like beetles do. And it just shows that this sort of diversity, if you were first maybe going to see this photograph, you'd assume it was from the tropics, but this is right here in our own backyards. So I am an entomologist and the owner of a business called Beetlelady. Through Beetlelady, I do educational programs throughout the San Francisco Bay Area. These are basically for any age, from preschoolers all the way through adults. These end up being a lot of library programs, and I have a lot of those coming up that you can find on my calendar at beetlelady.com. In fact, I'll say this since this is for Coastside, my pop-up bug museum will be exhibited at the Half Moon Bay Library on April 23rd. So look for that on my calendar, as well as other classes like Bugs of Animal Crossing, preschooler story times, adult nature journaling classes, and things like that that I have coming up through the public libraries. I also do programs for public and private schools, homeschool groups, and events like birthday parties, corporate parties. Basically, if people want bugs, I'm their person. And this is some pictures of me in action. I teach a couple specialty classes, like a Bugs of Pokemon class, that engages children with what they already know about the arthropods in the game Pokemon with what the real animals do in real life. I teach a regular high school class at Design Tech High School, where I get to teach the kids about bugs for 2 weeks, 3 hours a day. And all of my programs involve live bugs. Because we're virtual today, that's going to be them showing to you on my camera that I have here, so you can get a close-up, but I feel like they are the best ambassadors for changing hearts and minds about arthropods. And it's also really important, and I bet a lot of you in the audience agree with me, given the nature of this event, that getting kids outside, getting kids in nature, it's not that hard. You put a net in the hand of a child, or you make an insect pooter to catch insects with them, and they are completely engaged. So it's one of the easy ways to get kids to engage in nature. And then I have a pop-up bug museum, like I mentioned, which is basically I can turn a space into arthropod zoo and museum for a day or multiple days. And this is what it looks like when it's up. And then lastly, I do insect illustrations. And so I teach classes about drawing insects, and just draw insects for fun, because it's one way that human beings respond to the beauty we see in the world, right? So let's launch into our topic. I want to talk about first set up with how diverse insects are, and then launch into a little bit about how we uncover that diversity, the diversity that exists here in California. And throughout the time, I'm going to give you some examples of local insects. I'm going to bring them out for you to meet. And then also we're going to end with a little bit about what you can do to help protect arthropod diversity, because it's a little bit different than talking about protecting things like African elephants. We can all play a really important role in our local insect and arthropod biodiversity. So first off, we're going to talk a lot about insects. So what is an insect? An insect, a lot of you knew this from grade school, right? Is an animal that has 3 body sections. These are arthropods, which are animals with exoskeletons. They have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. All insects have 6 legs, 2 antennae, 4 wings. Sometimes some insects have secondarily lost their wings. Think of something like an ant. But if they have wings, they have 2 pairs of wings. And they have these special eyes called compound eyes. And insect diversity, if we're going to talk about biodiversity and we're going to talk about caring about nature and animals, you really can't leave insects out, because there are over 1 million described species of insects on our planet. And we're actually, basically, me and other entomologists like me are constantly adding species to this list. In the order of tens of thousands a year get added to this list. And because we're scientists, we can use computers and math to use data that we collect to estimate how many there are actually out there. You'll see a little bit of how I did this with some biodiversity research in Ecuador in a moment. But those estimates give us the lowest level we give it is 5 million species, and sometimes the estimates go as high as 20 million. So even if we're being conservative, for every 5 species of insects that exists on our planet, 1 of them has been described, and 4 still remain out there scurrying and crawling and fluttering and waiting for scientists like me or scientists in the future to discover them. And you can compare this to, there's about 10,000 species of birds in the world and 5,500 species of mammals. And especially when it comes to mammals, we're only add a couple species of mammals every few years to that list. A few other ways to look at it graphically. This is one of my favorite drawings. It's from a textbook by Penny Gullen and Pete Cranston on entomology. And it's basically all of these organisms are drawn in proportion to the number of species that exist in the group. So you see that giant housefly towering over that tiny elk, which represents all mammals, including ourselves. Here's another way to look at it, a simple bar graph. These are the number of known species of all this group and these groups. And as you know, I just said, the insects are growing. So those numbers are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And lastly, I like this graph because it shows the darker circle in the center is the number of known species, and then that lighter circle is the estimated species. So it gives you that sense of the coverage that we have. So for instance, we think we know about 20% of insects, but only know about 17% of arachnids. So even though there are fewer species of arachnids in the world, we haven't covered as many of them, as percentage of them as we have with insects. And we're talking about our beautiful state of California. This is one of the most remarkable things about California. We have over 100,000 insects described from California. So that's 1/10 of the world biodiversity. And that's a lot. And those of you who travel our beautiful state and go outdoors realize that one of the reasons for this is California is incredibly diverse in terms of habitats. We have deserts, we have high elevation mountains, we have coastal habitats. And you can compare this, there are about 223 California mammals and 641 California birds. And one of the reasons that actually uncovering the true diversity of insects in California, even though it's an incredibly populated state with a lot of great universities doing a lot of great research, is that insects are active year-round in most parts of California. So we have a couple things that we're up against when we're trying to measure insect diversity. You can go to the same location in May, but you may not see the same insects there as you would in September. So there's sampling temporally over time. There's also entomologists are just like everybody else. We travel the same highways. We go to the same destinations as a lot of people do. So we end up with a lot of these things that I've heard a bunch of nicknames for them, like the casino distribution or the highway distribution in insect collections. So where people commonly collect, whereas that path that's you have to hike 10 miles into the wilderness to get to that location is not going to be as well collected, right? So there's a lot of reasons that we still have not uncovered all of our California insect diversity. And one of the big questions about this is if we're asking fundamental questions about life on our planet, insects offer a great opportunity to talk about why some organisms are successful in terms of their biodiversity, if we're using that as a measure of success. And for insects, it's not really any one reason, it's a number of different reasons. These can be their size. So an insect is going to be partitioning the environment into smaller and smaller niches, whereas something like an elk, the forest is their habitat. An insect is going to maybe be a specialist on the water that accumulates in plants on the sides of oak trees in that habitat. So it's smaller environmental partitions. Insects also reproduce differently than larger animals. They produce a lot of offspring. They have quick generational times, so they can evolve really quickly. Insects are just the product of good evolutionary timing. Their ancestors were the first animals to colonize land from the ocean, from their ancestors that were ocean-dwelling arthropods. So they just lucked out when it came to timing. And then there's a few key moments in insect evolution that we see. We see when insects evolved flight, there's an explosion in diversity. When they evolved the ability to fold their wings up, there was an explosion in diversity. When they evolved metamorphosis, there was an explosion in diversity. And also when flowering plants and insects started co-evolving together, we also see a huge explosion in diversity. And then one more recent addition to this list is there's actually a lower rate of background extinction compared to other organisms. So insects tend to lose species diversity at a slower rate. That is though considering all things being kind of status quo, and our current Anthropocene insect and biological diversity collapse is not included in that. We are losing insects at an alarming rate. So if you look at the insect tree of life, here are a few of those big explosions. You have wings show up, and these are things that have old wings. They don't fold, things like dragonflies and damselflies. These are our very primitive flying insects. And then when insects can fold their wings, you see this huge explosion in diversity. All of these taxa are evolved from the original insects that could fold their wings over their back like a honeybee, as opposed to holding them out like a dragonfly. Another thing that happened is metamorphosis. When metamorphosis shows up on the insect tree of life, we see another explosion in diversity. And these are our groups that actually make up most of insect diversity. This is about 80% of insect diversity is in insects that have metamorphosis. So that's another big one. And then I'm going to bring up beetles a few times because, as you noticed, I'm called Beetlelady, and that's because I am what is called a coleopterist. I specialize in beetles, so all my research has been on beetles. And beetles are fascinating because they're particularly diverse. What makes an animal a beetle specifically, and what we think make beetles so diverse, is this wing folding mechanism. This is a weevil that landed on my on a taxi cab for me when I was on a trip in the Caribbean last year. And I always carry a bug jar, so I put him in a little bug jar and took him to the beach and took some videos and photos of him before releasing him. And what he's demonstrating here in this looped video is this ability of beetles to have this hard wing casing. That's their first pair of wings, those bright yellow wing cases. They're called elytra. And they can fold up their membranous flying wings and tuck them in there. So this allows a beetle to exploit all sorts of habitats, like being in dung, carrion, under wood, crawling through bark, crawling through leaf litter without messing up those flying wings. So that's what we think is the big key to beetle diversity. And what that's done for beetles is it's made them one of the most diverse groups of insects. You just heard me say we have 1 million described species of insects. Beetles are 450,000 of those 1 million species. So we're talking about the bulk of insect life. And beetles are so diverse, I teach kids this. This is how somebody like me, an entomologist who studies beetles, counts in the world. I look at every living species of plant and animal, and I know that 1 in 5 is a beetle. So if I look at all of them and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, beetle, and half of those are a particular group of beetles, the weevils. So I would go 1, 2, 3, 4, weevil. So it's this amazing component of biodiversity, not only insects, but beetles in particular. So let's introduce you to one of our local California beetles. I love this group because you guys are probably very familiar with them. I was showing one as we were setting up for the webinar today, and instantly Joe knew that this was what some people called a picante beetle or a stink beetle or a skunk beetle. This is an incredibly diverse group of beetles. This is known as the family Tenebrionidae. The affectionate name entomologists often give them is tenebs. There are 20,000 species of tenebrionids in the world. And as of 2014, which was the latest survey I could find, there were 447 species recorded in California. Tenebrionids are known for their chemical defenses and their death feigning defenses. And these are actually really long-lived beetles. They're very easy to care for. So I often recommend them as if a kid wants to have an insect that they keep as a pet. These are a great insect that can survive a lot of time where maybe a kid might forget to give them water and things like that. They're incredibly hardy beetles that are adapted for all sorts of extreme environments. So let me show you. I'm going to stop my screen share with this. Hold on a second. There. And I'm going to switch over. I've got one of the fun things about tenebs is they don't fly. They are an insect that has secondarily lost their wings. So I'm going to bring out a couple of these to show you some of our local diversity and kind of give you an idea of how they can look similar, but so different from each other in this group of with over 20,000 species. So the first one I'm going to bring out is that picante beetle. Here it is. This is one of the really diverse beetles, the picante beetle. So if you've seen these hiking along the coast, this is one of the tenebs that is a master of chemical defense. They will stick their abdomen up in the air and they will make a stinky smell. These are often chemicals called benzoquinones. And if you touch them, that chemical will stain your skin, kind of like a henna tattoo would. So that's one of our larger species of Eleodes tenebrionid beetles. In the deserts in California, we have a lot of small ones. This is a small little hairy tenebrionid beetle. So again, you kind of get the sense that it's related, but very different body shape, very different kind of looking animal, but one of many tenebs in California. And then we also have a lot of death feigning tenebs. So this is a death feigning beetle. These are great. I'll see if it'll do it for me. These pretend to be dead when they're bothered. Sometimes they're so used to me that they're like, no, I'm not going to do it. Let's see if one of his friends will do it a little more readily. Oh, there. That one did it more readily. So they will often pretend to be dead. They also have very, very tough exoskeletons, so could literally break the teeth of an animal that would try to consume them. So those are tenebrionid beetles. Let me go back to my FaceTime. Okay, and let's go back to the presentation. Share screen. All right. Here are a few other photos of local tenebrionids. Again, that's one of those picante beetles that you might be used to. This is one that I photographed with my students at Design Tech High School. So this was just right outside of the Oracle campus in Redwood Shores. So insects play every kind of ecological role you can imagine. There can't be over 1 million species that we know of and maybe 5 million out there without them pretty much filling every ecological niche you can imagine. As like Joe said, these are kind of the backbone, ironically, given they have no backbones of the natural world. If we lost insects, we would see a great collapse of biological diversity on our planet. Here are a few examples. So we have scavengers. This is a kind of a trox beetle. These are often late decay scavengers that will feed on really dry hides of dead things like squirrel or deer or other animals. If you've ever seen these, this is a camel cricket. These will live in dark places like caves or under wood, and they tend to generally be scavengers of all sorts of organic material. Ones that are very common out here that I challenge you to view with a little more love is the earwig. We have a lot of different kinds of earwigs. If the earwigs have a curved pincher like this, they're male. If they have straight pinchers, they're female. And one of the behaviors that you can really frequently see, especially going into springtime out here, is females guarding their eggs and their young. This is an insect that actually shows a lot of parental care. We have lots of wood scavengers and fungal scavengers that you can find as an entomologist. One of my favorite things to do when hiking is to look through rotten wood, to turn over logs. I always turn them back how I found them, but to look for these sorts of scavengers and other arthropods. We have a lot of wood feeders. This is one of our most impressive insects that we have in Northern California. This is the Prionis longhorn beetle, and they're a wood-boring cerambycid beetle. We have a lot of fungus feeders, so often looking under fungus can yield lots of beautiful little insects like this nididulid beetle. Dung feeders, of course, are another category of scavengers, so dung beetles and other beetles and other insects that decompose fecal matter. Herbivores, of course, another huge category. We have things like true bugs that pierce and suck the juices out of plants. We have things like the 10-line June beetles that are herbivores as adults and larvae. This is a similar, smaller species that was in the redwoods. In parts of California, we have blister beetles. This is actually a quite large one that is from San Diego area. And I also show this to demonstrate that another way that insects are diverse is you have to consider what is the adult eating, but also what is the larval form eating. So in this case, the adults are herbivores, but the larvae are often predators. And these give a nice warning display to let you know that they can cause blisters with a chemical that they make. Of course, we have pollinators. I purposefully am showing non-bee pollinators. We have a lot of beautiful, diverse bees in our state, but there's a lot of other insects that are important pollinators, different beetles. This is very typical of a beetle to like a large white flower. Those are often attractive to beetles. You may look at this. A lot of things that people will assume are pollinating bees are actually flies. This is a syrphid fly. They're one of our most important pollinating groups. And they are beautiful. They look everything like bees because they mimic them. And you will see them buzzing about in your gardens and on flowers quite often. Predators, of course, are another important group of insects and other arthropods. This is a predatory carabid beetle. This is a similar species of carabid beetle, which is a bombardier beetle. You may have heard of them. They do this amazing chemical defense where they mix chemicals and have an exothermic reaction out of the backsides of their abdomen. They're a predatory carabid beetle as well. And then a lot of our common insects, right? Some of which are introduced, some of which are native. This is a ladybug. They're very important predators, both as larvae and as adults. And I love this photo because this ladybug is demonstrating one of their defenses, which is a behavior called reflexive bleeding, where they'll ooze out some of their foul tasting insect blood or hemolymph out of their joints in order to let a predator know that they taste bad without having to be consumed, to have that figured out. And then parasites are often a huge part of insect diversity. In fact, a lot of people who study wasps believe that their diversity is going to surpass beetle diversity once they all get described, because so many of them are parasites and hyperparasites and parasitoids of other insect species. This is a very tiny, tiny wasp. And here's a larger wasp that she will use that thing that looks like a stinger. It's actually her ovipositor. It's what the stinger evolves from, but she will use this to bore into a wood boring beetle under a log. And then another really important group of insects that is worth noting, especially if you're interested in conservation, are aquatic insects, because aquatic insects are often used as bioindicators to let us know the health of our ecosystems by monitoring the health of our freshwater habitats. So this is a caddisfly larva. This one's actually outside of its case. A lot of times you'll see them within a case that they make to protect themselves in the water. This is a really important kind of aquatic insect called a stonefly. These are incredibly sensitive to pollution, so they're used as bioindicators because they are some of the first to go if you have a polluted stream. Okay, so I wanted to really quickly go over how we uncover some of this insect diversity. I'm going to do this pretty fast because I've still got a bunch of bugs I want to share. I probably picked too many things to share today. But here is a little bit about how we do the research where we figure out what is out there. And this is an example from some work that I got to do as a graduate student in Ecuador, in the rainforests in Ecuador. I basically was looking at the bark beetle diversity in Ecuadorian rainforest canopy. Bark beetles are, you are probably familiar with them from a lot of the pest species that we have that cause great outbreaks and a lot of tree death in our forest ecosystems. Bark beetles are a really diverse group of weevils. Remember that group of beetles that I said was half of the species. There's about 7,500 described species. But at the time that I started this research project in graduate school, fewer than 50 species had been recorded from Ecuador, which was pretty unlikely to be how many there actually were there. So I joined up with the Smithsonian Institute on a project that had been run by Dr. Terry Irwin for many decades. He had started it when I was in high school, actually, and continued it through the end of his life, where they were looking at what insects live in the upper architecture of the rainforest. So we wanted to know what bark beetles were up here. And the way that it was done is, this is Dr. Irwin. He devised this technique where we used an insecticidal fog. So we basically would sample a tree. This was done a few times over a several year period. You'd go to the rainforest, you'd set out a sheet to trap the bugs under the tree. An insecticide would be fogged into the tree. It was a very fast-acting insecticide, harmless to humans, and also not persistent in the environment. It would biodegrade into its constituent chemicals within a few hours. So it didn't have a long-term effect on the insects in the environment. And so we basically sample what insects were in a single tree. Here's what the cabinets at the Smithsonian, they probably still look like this today because there is so much work to be done on all this material that was collected. I examined over 1,100 samples, and I found bark beetles in 69% of those samples, so in the majority of them. I got individuals, I got 2,500 individual specimens, and this ended up being 400 morphospecies. And what a morphospecies is it's when an expert like myself basically looks at an insect and says, that looks different from that, looks different from that. And so I'm going to call that a species, and that a species. In insects, morphospecies are usually actually underestimates of the true diversity, because insects often have things like cryptic species where they're not apparent morphologically from outside view, but if you do stuff like dissect them or sequence their DNA, they turn out to be quite different species. So we're looking at a huge difference in diversity based on that just 50 specimens. But this took decades of effort. It took a lot of funding. Luckily, bark beetles, since they're a pest, there's a human incentive to fund research on them. But a lot of insects don't have pests. And so you have to sell this as fundamental scientific research, just wanting to explore our planet and do that basic discovery. We described a lot of new species and a new genus of bark beetles from this sample, and a few people have actually done graduate degrees off of these samples as well. And unfortunately, Dr. Irwin passed away during the COVID pandemic, and so we published the final findings from this in the journal Zookeys in 2020 in a memorial issue to him. And one of the most important things about doing this sort of fundamental research is these, we do sample insects, we do kill insects to do this research, but these are all deposited in insect collections at places like the Smithsonian or Cal Academy or UC Davis. And these specimens are used for centuries to come. We have perfected new techniques for doing things like sequencing DNA from long dead specimens. And so this is really part of how scientists can monitor biodiversity and habitat loss and changing ranges of these organisms. And there are things that researchers will do with these specimens when I'm long gone that I can't even imagine at this point. So yeah, let me skip. I'm going to skip this bit. This is an ecological bit because I want to show you a little more. Let's bump ahead to a little bit more of our local bugs. So I want to show you some of the common insects that you might encounter here on in the Bay Area and specifically on the coast. As we're going into spring, there's going to be some things that you see in large numbers. Some of them on some of our warmer days may already be out. These soldier beetles are a soft-winged flower beetle that are very common on plants. They're really fun to see, and I see them a lot hiking along the coast. Skippers are very common, especially they seem to come out a little bit earlier than some butterflies do. Skippers are a subgroup of butterflies with these kind of thicker bodies, and they're great to see, and you'll see them around locally. We have a lot of really cool local bee diversity, including this large yellow-faced bumblebee, and you can see all the pollen packed on this bee's legs. This is one of my favorite local groups that I want to get you guys to keep an eye out for. These are called snake flies. And the really cool thing about snake flies, okay, first off, look how cool it looks, right? I will admit this is a snake fly that I photographed in Montana because it's the best photo I've ever gotten of a snake fly. But what's incredible about snake flies is snake flies only live in the northern hemisphere. These are a completely not at all tropical insect group. There are no snake flies in things like the rainforest. This is a completely temperate region insect, so they're not at all in the southern hemisphere. They're completely in the northern hemisphere, and they are really great, and you'll see them in abundance in certain periods of the year because they'll emerge in mass to mate and lay eggs like this female is doing. Now let me show you another live bug. This is one of my favorite local live bugs. This is the Jerusalem cricket. They have many different names. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna turn off the slide and just tell you these things while I'm showing it to you in person. Let me get it out. Okay, so the Jerusalem cricket is one of our largest local insects. It's got an interesting name because it's not a cricket and they don't occur in Jerusalem. So common names are not always good. Oh, and here he is. There's his food. He's right there. Do you see that little Jerusalem cricket butt? So here he is. This is a male specimen, a local male. There he is. Oh, and we need to maybe zoom out. He's way bigger than the bugs we had before. So Jerusalem crickets, if you have not ever seen them locally, part of the reason for that is they are nocturnal. So we'll often see them at night. If you see one walking in the day, it actually may be infected with something called the horsehair worm, which causes them to wander during the day. But sometimes they just get disturbed. I've got really large Jerusalem crickets that I've caught because somebody was walking their dog and the dog disturbed it and it came running out along the path. These don't have any wings. And if you're interested in local insect behavior, I'll bring this up for a few of the bugs that I'm showing you. Check out our local public television station, KQED. They have a show called Deep Look. And if you look at them on YouTube, they have a whole great video about Jerusalem crickets and their courtship behavior of drumming their abdomens, which is a really interesting, complicated call and response behavior between male and female Jerusalem crickets. This little guy's name is Picard. And they get bigger than this, especially the females. And the trick with Jerusalem crickets is they won't bite you as long as you don't hold them down. Most insects, and most arthropods in general. If I put my thumb on this guy, his jaws would open up because he'd feel trapped. But he is just happy to walk along my hand. So these are a very interesting herbivore that live underground that we often don't encounter unless we're out late at night or maybe digging a garden or a new foundation for a house. Okay, let me switch back to my other video. All right, put the card away. Let me show you a couple other bugs because I know we're running short on time and I want to do a few more. Oh, hold on, that was not screen share. There we go. Okay, so there's that's one of large female Jerusalem cricket. That was one of the biggest ones I ever had. Other ones you might see in this time of year, we have our California sulfur-winged grasshopper, which are named for the bright yellow wings they have underneath. A couple of insects that you will see commonly around here are not native. So just as we have a lot of invasive plants, we have a lot of invasive insects in the Bay Area. Not all are necessarily particularly harmful or major pests. This is one that is invasive pretty much all over anywhere that it can be in cosmopolitan that it can survive. It's called the devil's coach horse beetle. It's a really cool beetle. You'll often see them in pairs under logs and things. Another one that is really common that you'll see on the coast is this Mediterranean leaf beetle. So this is not native to our Mediterranean climate, but very happy to be in it. So there's also other bugs, right? So we're not just talking about insects. I've kind of focused on insects so far, but let me, as I'm closing out, talk a little bit about some other bugs that we have in the area. There's basically 4 groups that I end up studying and teaching about. These include insects, obviously, and then they include this group, the roly-polies and woodlice, which are isopods, and these are terrestrial crustaceans. So they're more closely related to things like crabs and lobsters. Let me show you really quickly some of these. This is this may be something you're learning about for the first time today, or maybe something you already knew, but one hobby that a lot of people have gotten into, especially with COVID, is breeding isopods. And people can actually breed these. If you see, this is our local common woodlouse. The woodlice are the ones that don't roll up completely into a ball. And you may notice a lot of these are the colors you're used to seeing, this kind of a grayish brown. That's a very common color. But all of these ones that you're seeing that are white and orange, and there's even a few in here that are kind of spotted like a koi fish. Oh, here's one. These are all selectively bred by people who are breeding the isopods. In fact, I talked to somebody who does it as part of a college class on genetics, where they teach the students how to, control the color spots on these by selectively breeding them. So, but these are the same kinds that you will see throughout our Bay Area as well. Let me switch again. Okay, screen sharing one more time. Another quick note about these, you see how there's purple ones in this slide? If you encounter the purple ones out here, they are infected with a virus. It is not a virus that will infect us at all, and it actually doesn't hurt them very much. It's a virus that is kind of like a herpes virus for them, and they get it from, they are scavengers, and they sometimes scavenge off of material of dead fellow isopods. So if they happen to eat bits of an isopod that was infected with the virus, they are infected as well. So that's a really cool little fact that you can share with people if you see purple ones. One of our coolest Bay Area bugs that I'm really excited to have a specimen of to show you is one of our local Bay Area millipedes. And these are incredible. These are the reason that you should never eat a millipede. Millipedes are all masters of chemical defenses, and this one makes a particularly nasty chemical called cyanide. So it smells like almonds. I'm going to turn my camera back on to show you again. And these we find usually in fairly pristine coastal and hillside habitats. There you can even see it. It's right there. And I don't worry about holding this one. I'm not going to lick my fingers afterwards. But if you find these, you can pick them up and look at them. They will smell like almonds, which is what cyanide smells like. And one of the really neat things about these is they glow under a black light. So if you are like me and you carry a black light flashlight, you can show people how they glow under that black light. I hope that's kind of coming through there. This is another animal for which there's an incredible video on Deep Look that I highly recommend watching. It's about how there's a beetle that has learned to overcome the cyanide that these guys produce. So don't eat millipedes, but do enjoy them and look for them while you're hiking throughout the Bay Area and on the coast. Okay, I'm gonna do just a quick bit more. I've got one more bug I wanted to show you. I think we can fit it in, and then I want to tell you quickly a little bit about conservation. Oop, hold on. Screen share and good. Okay. We also have centipedes in the Bay Area. This is our fiery centipede, small, medium-sized centipede throughout the Bay Area. And then the last bug that I wanted to share a live specimen of is, I don't know how many of you have gotten to encounter our local tarantula. We have a beautiful local species of tarantula. This one has been called Aphonopelma smithii, but it's also been merged with another species called Iotis. So if that's correct, then the correct species name is Aphonopelma iotis. These are native to California, and they are in woodland and chaparral habitats. These are the ones that you will see on Mount Diablo in great numbers in the fall, in October and September. So I'm going to show you, this is I'm cheating a little. I've got a Aphonopelma species. She's one of my best teaching tarantulas, and she is a closely related species called Aphonopelma chalcodes. And this is Barbara. Let me switch to this video camera one more time. Oh, and now we're zoomed in for a small millipede. So as you can see, this is not an animal I'm worried about biting me, especially if you see these in the wild. This female would be hiding in a burrow, and so it's less likely you'd see her. If you were hiking and you see them wandering, they're the males, and the males are looking for their females, and they're so single-minded about finding a mate that they will often just walk across your hand and then just keep going. In the case that anybody is bit by one of these, they have incredibly mild venom. It's less than a bee sting, and often actually don't even use the venom when biting in defense. Their main defense is their itchy hairs. So never eat a millipede and never pet a tarantula. You can hold them like this, but it's not advised to pet them because then you'll end up with very itchy eyes and nose. Okay, I want to do one last bit. I'm sorry, I prepared almost too much for you guys. You can see how much I love these creatures. Let me quickly do one last bit that I promised I would do, which is a little bit about what you can do to help conserve these amazing animals. Because now that maybe you might have already cared about them, but now that I've got you really caring about them, I want to show you a little bit about some of the things you can do to conserve them. Oh, and here's a few other beautiful local arachnids, like our local jumping spider and our local, this is one of our local California forest scorpions. We do have scorpions out here. None of them are very medically significant. They won't bother you if you don't bother them. And this is a female carrying her babies on her back. So now that we realize how important all these animals are, how do we conserve them? And I want to just give you a few quick things about this. One of the most important things about, let's see, did I switch back? I did not switch to screen sharing, did I? Caught myself not sharing. Oh, hold on. Wrong screen. See, even professors have problems with this. Okay, so you didn't get to see what I was just showing. Let me go back. Here's our beautiful jumping spider, local jumping spider. And here's that forest scorpion with the babies on her back. Sorry about missing that I wasn't sharing. Okay, so one of the most important things about conserving insects is changing our attitudes about diversity. And let me tell you a quick story that really demonstrates how off sometimes our attitudes about insect conservation can be. So when I was growing up in Los Angeles in the 1980s, one of the great conservation stories that we were told a lot is about the California condor, because we almost lost that species, and the Los Angeles Zoo was instrumental in the recovery program for that species. And if you recall, what they did was they brought all of the wild condor population into the Los Angeles Zoo and did a captive breeding program and then released them. One of the interesting things that happened when they did this was they knowingly caused the extinction of another species. They deloused all of the California condors that were brought into the zoo. They had a species of louse that had evolved with them that is only found on the California condor. So this is just a really interesting exercise in what humans value and our attitudes about this. And I challenge you to think to yourself, are you okay with this? Or is this a demonstration of how we could eradicate one species while trying to protect another? And by the way, the louse was not causing illness in the condors. This is a co-evolved pest that they had, and it lived along with them, causing very little harm to the birds. One of the ways that we conserve insects is the same way we were conserving the condor. We do captive breeding and release. This is the beautiful American burying beetle, for which there's a long-standing captive breeding program throughout the United States. One of the most important things in insect conservation, and here's the good news, is the key is habitat preservation, right? And a lot of people care about things like the tiger, and a lot of entomologists grumble and say, oh, that's just charismatic megafauna that people care about, and they don't really care about the insects. But the key is that if you protect the forest for the tiger, you're protecting the forest for the beetles and all the other beautiful insects that live there. So if we piggyback on these general conservation efforts and protect the habitats, that is the key to insect conservation. But one of the things that's unique about insects that's a little different from the tiger and the bear and the elephant is that when it comes to insects, we don't just have to be armchair park rangers and say, oh, if I lived in Africa and had some land, I would do this and this and this. We can all contribute to the conservation of insects in our gardens, in our balconies, in our local neighborhoods by doing a few simple things. One of the key things is planting California natives. So California native plants, as we know, are very good because of their drought tolerance. They're also great because this is what our local wildlife has evolved with. And I can tell you from my own experience of eliminating the lawn that came with my house and planting a native garden, the diversity is huge. And one of the great resources for this is the website calscape.org. It not only gives you the plants that are native to your area, but you can also link that with which ones are host plants for particular butterflies and moths if you want to find out what moths and butterflies are native to your area and which ones you can promote. And it really makes a huge difference in creating these wildlife corridors where these animals can exist in our urban environments. And then one other thing that you can do in your own home is leaving the leaves. We have a culture of raking up leaves in, especially in a lawn landscape, right? But if you can keep some of the leaf litter, even if it's just under some of your garden beds and plantings and trees, leaf litter is important habitats for arthropods. So when we rake up all the leaves in our yards, we actually eliminate a lot of moth cocoons and pupating beetles and larvae of different insects. And it's a really key environment. So if you can just leave some of the leaves, that can make an enormous difference in the diversity that you will see in your neighborhood. Okay, I went a little bit over, but I'm here to answer questions for anybody. Kate's going to pop on and she's going to read questions that we may have. And I'm happy to answer questions. Also, if you don't get your questions answered today, or you have a discussion, or you think of something, my website is beetlelady.com, and there's a little contact form. You can send me a message on there, and I will respond as soon as possible. So I'm going to switch back. Thank you, Kate.
Yay!
Sorry to go a little over.
No, I'm like, keep going. This is amazing. Thank you so much. Oh, you know what? We have a bunch of questions. I'm going to try to jam as many of these in because we've got some great questions. One of which,
and I'm happy to. I know we want to end on time, but I'm happy to stay a few minutes longer.
And for any of you who are here and you're the polite type that want to just follow through to the end, we'll have a recording too, so you can take off when you feel like you need to.
I won't cry if I see the numbers go down. I promise.
Okay. So Toni Corelli is our local botanist. You may know of her, but she gave you applause for your talk, but she wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about how insects are used for biocontrol in invasive plant species. And she said, do you know of any insects that are being used for this use in our area in the San Mateo coast or nearby?
You know, I think they're using, so there is a weevil, and I'm going to blank on the exact species name, but a lot of our thistles, a lot of our invasive thistles, which I know can be a big problem on the coast. And I know that in the Central Valley, like UC Davis woodland kind of area, there's a weevil that was imported that's a pest in the natural habitat, a lot of these invasive thistle plants that was having really good success in keeping the numbers down. So I'd have to look up to see if specifically on the coast we've used them, but I'd bet my money that we are using them in some of the control. I don't think there are any that help with things like ice plant or any of those coastal invasives that are so prevalent. But I do know that in addition to removing the plants physically, that a lot of these plant feeding insects, because basically what's happened is they've co-evolved, and if you have something like an invasive plant here, it's loving it because it often isn't matched with things that are keeping it in check. And so what we can do is bring in some of these animals from their native habitat to control them and keep the checks and balances, because that's often why invasives go so crazy, is they're not evolved with what's native here.
Okay. I'll piggyback that one on, because Todd Rubin asked the question about honeybees specifically. He was saying, they're non-native and there's a lot of concern about their population challenges due largely to the commercial concern. He's wondering if you could briefly discuss their ecological impact, like positive and negative as a non-native, and what species they displace.
Yeah.
Plants are favored or not as a result of these populations of honeybees.
Yeah, so honeybees are an interesting kind of a sore spot for a lot of entomologists, because you see so much press about save the bees, but it's focusing on what is ecologically essentially a cow in terms of insects. It is a non-native agricultural animal. Most honeybees are being kept by people. There are some that are wild. But in the meantime, we have tens of thousands of native bee species that are just absolutely incredible, and that, are evolved to pollinate a lot of our local plants. The honeybees will pollinate our local plants too. They're competing with our native bees for that pollen as well. But realistically, especially in an agriculture state, because as I think you said, it was Todd touched on, they're a huge industry. I forget the exact numbers, but it's in the millions and billions. If you go into crops that are either pollinated by bees like almonds, or crops or agricultural products that are indirectly affected by bees like beef, where the cattle, right, the alfalfa that the cattle are fed are pollinated by bees. It's a huge part of our agricultural industry, especially in California. So most of our bees, thankfully, when you have things like the diseases that we see in honeybees that are, like the colony collapse disorder and things like that, those are not affecting our native bees, because by and large, our native bees are solitary bees. Most bees live alone in the ground, which also goes back to the leaving the leaves. These are ground nesting animals. And so luckily, there's not, other than competing with the local bees for pollen and resources, they're not really affecting them in the same sense. Now we are seeing, declines in all insect population numbers. And so it's kind of a different animal. The bee problem was more overuse in agriculture, transporting of bees, lots of diseases. We've bred them to be more docile, which also means they're more vulnerable to disease than something like an Africanized bee. So yeah, it's a complicated issue, but the native bees, what they're dealing with is habitat loss primarily. It's not the same issues.
Okay, thank you. I feel like I'm giving you a couple of the negative ones, and then we'll start here. And then
that's okay.
The next question, of course, is about ticks. You can't have a conversation without people asking you about ticks. So just curious about your thoughts on ticks on the coast side. This person was actually asking if you could kind of tell us a little bit about the body design of it. What kind of a bug is a tick?
Yeah, let me grab some ticks out of my collection here.
Just grab some ticks from my drawer here.
insects are not very, where are they? Oh. I have all these displays in here that are like really showy and beautiful. And other than the spotted lanternfly that's now a pest on the east coast of the United States, pest bugs are not very showy. So let me open this up because it makes it a little easier to show you. And I'll put my camera on and show you some ticks. I will say that if you are interested in information about ticks, that some of the, oh, and of course it's on this far side here, some of the best information you can get about ticks locally, and this is actually where I got these specimens, was from our local abatement district, our local mosquito control and abatement district. So they do a lot of the resources about ticks. So these are a couple ticks. This is the Pacific Coast ticks. So these are smaller, right? These haven't fed. You can see how tiny they are, right? This is really little guy. And what ticks do is they hang out on grasses and basically are reaching out for people. The good news is, unlike the Pacific Northwest, we don't have a lot of Lyme disease here in our area. So it's here, but in very low numbers. So it's not as big of a concern. This is the Western black-legged tick. So you can see they can be really tiny too. And this is the American dog tick. So again, they're really, really tiny. And my camera doesn't even really focus great on these. So yeah, a good thing to have if you're a hiker, so I don't make you guys nauseous and dizzy. A good thing to have if you're a hiker is tick keys. So these are a little metal keychain kind of a thing that you can have, that you can carry with you, and it helps you remove the tick in a way that does not leave the head embedded in you. And if you are concerned about ticks, you can call the local abatement district, the local vector. Here they're called the vector control district. And so these are our local government agency that deals with mosquitoes and ticks. They're also the people you call if you find like a dead crow and you want to have it checked for West Nile virus. So they're a really good resource, and we pay for them as taxpayers. And so they will help direct you to getting ticks tested if you want to have it tested for Lyme disease, and they also give out these tick keys. I often have them. Hopefully I'll have some more at one of my pop-up bug museums, because they often give them to me to give out to the public at these events. Yeah. I hope that answers the question. Ticks are arachnids, by the way. They're related to spiders and scorpions and things like that.
Okay, thank you. And I will put a plug in just in case people are starting to leave, that Dr. Dole has put, I linked on here in the chat, and we'll also link it in a follow-up email, a link to her website, because she has a couple of pop-ups. She was just saying pop-ups where she's coming in and doing education. And actually, that's how I found you. That's how I initially was introduced to Dr. Dole. We were in this library pop-up at the Half Moon Bay Library, and we're like, this is crazy. I mean, from kids to adult, it was like bringing kids, and then we're like, who's learning here? We were all learning.
Yeah.
So there's one, I think you have, I wrote it down. You have, you'll be at the Hillsdale Mall on the April 22nd.
Yeah, that weekend it'll actually be up at the Hillsdale Mall on the 22nd on Earth Day. And then I just booked Half Moon Bay Library for the day after. So if you're on the coast, that beautiful new library that they have in Half Moon Bay, and we're going to have the museum
get everything
up for a few
all set
hours.
up.
Yeah.
Okay, so check those out. It sounded like you were still updating that too.
Yeah, I'm adding more. I've got so many new bookings so I got partway through May. So you'll see more coming on the calendar for May through June. And those are my public events that anybody can come to. And then of course I'm all available for other events as well.
Awesome. Okay. Still more questions. Can I ask you a couple more? Okay.
Yeah.
So another one was someone was asking about life expectancies of insects. Could you kind of give us a range and then specifics?
Okay, so this is going to be my opportunity to show you a really cool non-native bug who I like showing. You'll see why I want to show him, because he's the most amazing thing. So one of the things that's important to remember about insects is, as human beings, we think about the adult stage, right? So we're thinking about how long is that bee going to be alive, or how long is that beetle going to be alive? With a lot of insects, and kids have a lot of trouble with this sometimes, their life cycle is skewed towards their immature stage. They'll actually spend a lot more of their life as a larva or a nymph and a pupa than as an adult. In fact, there's a lot of insects. We have a lot of native moths in our area that have no functional mouth parts. The adults basically don't live long enough to bother eating. So they're just living off of what reserves they have. They're mating and laying eggs. So a great example of this is this amazing beetle. I can't miss an opportunity to show him while he's still alive. I'm interrupting him eating a banana right now. This is real. It is alive. This is a Goliath beetle. It's one of the largest beetles in the world. And they are native to Central Africa. And this one was raised in captivity. There's a bunch of entomologists who are now raising them now that the USDA has lifted. They used to be, well, basically unless the USDA says something is legal, it is illegal. So now you can have these in the US, but here's the trick. This guy, as this beautiful, magnificent adult beetle, is only going to live 2 to 6 months. So he has spent most of his life as a larva underground, eating, rotten wood and things like that. And now as an adult, he's going to be fairly short-lived. So you won't see these in pet stores until the price drops enough that an average person would be willing to spend that money on a pet that would only live a few months, right? But for me as an educator, it ended up being well worth it. So that's an example. In California, we have a lot of insects that are what we call univoltine. So that means one generation per year. They pretty much have a life cycle where, eggs overwinter, they hatch out in the spring, and then by the end of the year, the adults pass away. So mantises are a great example of this. When you see praying mantises out and about in the fall, you often see them laying egg cases because that's one of the final acts that the female does before dying. But we do have a lot of insects and other arthropods that can live quite a long time. So for an example, the Bay Area blonde tarantula that I told you about, those and the other related Aphanis pelma species, if they're males, they'll live 5 to 7 years. Once males become sexually mature, they only have a few months left in them, and that's usually when you're seeing them wandering in the hills. Females, though, will live 25 to 30 years. So it's an incredibly long-lived animal. If you find a female tarantula, just as we try to be conscious of, when people are fishing, sometimes once you have a fish that's big enough the person would want to catch it, we're talking about an animal that's lived for years or even decades. So there can be quite a range, especially in the more temperate parts of California, where an animal isn't going to have to overwinter as a larva or an egg or a pupa. Then you'll have animals like, another example is these darkling beetles that I showed you, the tanibs. These guys live 8 to 10 years. So they can be quite long-lived species. Yeah, so it ranges quite a lot. This is Andre, by the way.
Any ways that you would categorize how, the lifespan of different types of insects?
What do you mean?
Just for what reason? Why are some of them size, or is it region, or have to do with just?
Yeah, some of it has to do. It definitely, when you're a small arthropod, you're very vulnerable to things like environmental changes. So if it's going to freeze, you're not going to be able to survive that like a warm-blooded animal would. So that's a big factor in it. Insects also, they have this general, they're in this group of, they're one of the organisms that produce a lot of offspring. Very few offspring survive. And then they have quick generation times. And that's, they kind of tend to be the two categories they are in the K-selected organisms. I think those are still the terms that are used in ecology. They were when I was a student. And so you have things like us that have fewer offspring, invest an incredible amount of resources into single offspring. We have high offspring survivorship, even in our non-modern human form. We had relatively high survivorship of our offspring. And things like us, elephants, a lot of mammals, right? Primates, some birds. Whereas insects, you basically dump tons of eggs into the environment. Most of them get eaten, which is important because that's a huge ecological role that insects play that I didn't touch on because I was kind of touching on how they affect the environment and what they eat. But the biggest role that insects and other arthropods play is in being food for birds and lizards and fish. And so that's such a huge part of that, and that's just kind of the niche that they play. And chicken egg, which came first? Did they produce more offspring because so many were being eaten, or did they get kind of pushed or so many are eaten because they're so abundant. It kind of, kind of tracks evolutionarily.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then the next question is, might this year with so much snow and freezing help to reduce the pine bark beetle infestation in the Sierras? Apologies for another negative aspect of beetles.
Oh, no, it's fine. It's an important part of insects. So I'm sorry, was there a question?
So do you think this year, she was just saying, or he or she might this year be with all the snow and freezing help to reduce the pine bark beetle infestation?
Yeah, so one of the reasons, so we have two things that happen with bark beetles. You either have a native species of bark beetle that then, because the forests are being stressed by drought or forest management, right? We have trees that would have succumbed to fire if we were allowing fire control of forests more. And then these sick trees, because especially if you're talking about a native bark beetle, the trees have defenses against them. They can use their sap and things like that to block the beetles from burrowing in the trees. But what happens is, if you have the trees that are too drought stricken, then the beetles can overwhelm the trees and kill them. And so maybe, definitely drought is one of the hugest factors in California that affects the health of our forests. So I would assume that then, if we have good snowpack and good rain and we get out of drought for a number of years, right? Not just 1 year or 2 years, then that helps the trees. The other way that bark beetles can be pests is when they're like the beetles that I studied in the tropics and they get introduced as non-native invasives. And that can be especially true in the group that I studied, because there are two ecological groups in that group. There's the true bark beetles, where they actually feed on the bark of the trees. And then there are things called ambrosia beetles. And these beetles actually carry with them a symbiotic fungus that they inoculate the tree with. The fungus is what digests the cellulose of the wood. And then the beetles basically feed on the fungus. So they're kind of like fungus farming beetles. And when these get introduced, they can either come with their fungus from the tropics, and that can then be an issue. We've had problems with them becoming pests of things like avocado trees, or they can pick up a novel new fungus in the non-native environment that could be a disease. So basically the fungus is essentially using the beetle as a means of transmitting itself as a fungal disease of trees, if that makes sense. So hopefully, yeah, since drought is one of the biggest things in California that that causes our trees to not be healthy, that and just, forest management is so difficult with people more and more leaving how many people do we know who've left the urban environment and moved further and further towards the foothills of the Sierra and things like that, and are now living in areas where fire is prevalent. And then, there's a push and pull. How much do we control fire, and how much is fire a healthy part of the ecosystem? And so that's another factor in it as well that is more complicated.
Thank you. I'm feeling a little pushed, like we probably need to wrap it up, but so there's a couple more questions, and I would just encourage you, anyone with a residual question, remaining question, if you want to, would it be all right if they send them to you? You have a great
we were talking about doing that. Yeah, send them to
and
Kate.
Also, I mean, if you got a lot of questions, it'd be neat to have, look into hosting an event. If you've got questions, really, a lot of people who are interested in that as well.
Yeah, I do private events. I'll go hiking with people. I've done that, where I have nets, we make insect pouters to do catch and release and just go check out what's local. I do parties. I've had adult birthday parties too. Those are particularly fun. But I do all sorts of events. So basically, if you want to learn about bugs, get a group together. I'll meet up with you. We'll do something.
Awesome.
And I think I said Joe, raise your hand. I saw a hand go up on Joe's screen?
Let's see. Maybe it's time to wrap it up. Maybe.
That was the.
But a couple of things. So just as we're about to go, just Anna Miller shared, just for anyone out there, and we can put some of these, or just, I think we'll just mention it. Joyful Noise by Paul Fleischman, a collection of poems for two voices. Each poem is about an insect. Doug Nolan was sharing, when he goes out for walks, he's got his two favorites that he encounters here in Half Moon Bay are walking sticks and the Ceanothus moth.
Yeah.
So these are just a couple of tidbits people are sharing. I know also
I just learned about that poetry book. I don't know if Anna, if you're the one who told me about it, but somebody had told me about it in the parking lot of the Menlo Park Library, and then was kind enough to also email me in case I'd forgotten it. And I have it. I've actually already used it in classes. It's an amazing little poem book that you read, two people read together, and it's all poems about bugs.
Wow,
Fantastic.
so cool. And then Robert Hall was just putting a plug in for the Random Museum. The Random Museum Bug Day on April 18th. So I'll link that.
This is not something I knew about. Oh yeah.
Well, good. Okay, so we'll put that
I'm in town then. And if you ever travel to Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Bug Fair in May is the event. It is so fun.
Oh,
we need one up here, but someday. I thought about starting one and then COVID hit, and we'll see someday. But we need a bug fair up here.
All right, so it is time for us to wrap up. Just thank you all for those of you who are here, and please, we will be sharing this as a follow-up email, as many of you know who've been to these before. We'll have a follow-up email coming out tomorrow or the next day. So look at it, watch it, listen to it again. If you got to only see part of it, that's a great thing to be doing while you're washing dishes and kind of if you've got a busy life, it's just brain food, right? However it's consumed, and also share it. It's a gift to share this kind of information with friends. So just make, if you find it interesting, just think of people that you think would also enjoy this. That's the hope here, is that we're sharing this information and it just becomes part of the collective, right? And this all moves us to understand the importance of conservation, and whether that means donating, which is a wonderful thing to be doing for the Coastside Land Trust. I mean, every dollar raised is used for our, restoration, junior land stewards programs, the monitoring of these open space lands, the coastal trail, the extension of the coastal trail, which is, going to be an equal access trail that's getting more people out there to enjoy the open spaces, or showing up at a work day, or just the decisions that you're making for your garden, right? All of those things are part of it all. So we are so grateful for you to be your time here to help in kind of filling that and adding to people's understanding. I think here on the coast side, it is amazing to see. I think a lot of people are really hungry to learn, and that's one reason that a lot of people are here, right? And spend time here. Whether you live here or whether you spend time and you come over the hill. Couple of other things we have, as you'll look on our website, we've got a couple of events coming up for Coastside Land Trust. We have April 8th, we do have a tour of the Parisima Old Town site. It has sold out. We kind of keep those small, but so if you get on there and you're like, dang it, we have another one coming up in July. So we'll be putting that up there pretty soon so that you can register for that. But really neat, the history and also the flora and fauna of that area too. A really special thing to be doing. We've got the Wildflower Day. We also have Chelsea Carey coming from Point Blue Conservation Science is going to be coming in June to speak with us about soil health and what's living in the soil. And should be really, really interesting. Another work day coming up too. So those will be coming on to our website. Some of those are there. Some of those will be added. So keep up to date. This, I think most folks are on our web or on a mailing list at this point. We try really hard not to send a lot. Usually just a couple of reminders as we have these coming up. So just keep, check in on our blog too, social media, just to see what's coming up. What you'd be interested in attending. And as always, please, if you haven't, or if you have, make time, and that we are grateful for people that are making donations to support this cause. So check out Dr. Stephanie Dole on her website. We will be sending all that. And thank you to all of you who are here and who are loyal supporters of the Coastside Land Trust. All right, have a great rest of the day.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you for sharing the Saturday with me.
All right. Bye-bye.